there are some assumptions about what standards mean for good middle-class life, and those are always to be kept in tension with the reality of what's going on, because it is only through that tension that you raise standards. That's the belief.
And where do these standards come from?
These standards come from a universalized notion of middle-class life, which is now, what do they call it? 3 BHK, 2 BHK? What the hell does it mean? It means that the world is now living as nuclear families, where there's one place where you meet others and you eat, there's another place where you cook, there's another place where you wash yourselves and ablution, and another place where you go to sleep. This has become the norm, the universal norm. And it is actually a fossilizing of the notion of living, which starts in the 1940s in India.
शरीर देश है, देश शहर है, शहर मशीन है। हम सब इस मशीन के कल पुर्जे हैं।
I mean, this is a very interesting point at which we can begin to think about or work or talk about your engagement with film, because this sounds a little bit like the characterization, basically, the making of a character, which is quite complex in this case when it comes to an architecture studio, design studio in an architecture institute. We have a teacher trying to construct and project a kind of figure, as you say, and then there are students that are somehow in between mimetic, trying to imitate, as well as trying to construct a vulnerability of their own that can allow for that learning. How does is it, and in your work in films, we have seen not what I would call scripted characters, right? They're very simply put, they're documentary films as a simple category, and but there is still somehow an aesthetic sense of characterizations in these films. Do you think it's fair to ask you if you have who or what is acting in your films? Is that a oblique question just for the sake of obliqueness, or do you see figures or characters as acting when you think of filming?
So the question really is this, right? In that sense, if one is thinking about using the idea of the performance as the metaphor, I presume, through which one is looking at film, the question is, who is the one who's performing?
You're right.
Yeah.
And in the film, in the documentary film, especially, let's just say, if I'm talking about, let's say you guys saw Lovely Villa, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also Nostalgia for the Future. These are the
Yes.
films, right?
Yes.
Now, in both cases, I'll answer the first one. It's an interesting question for me to think through. Nostalgia for the Future was made for an organization that was Films Division India, which is the government propaganda wing. In government India propaganda. It's been around since the 1940s, making propaganda films, which very often were ways in which we were all supposed to become those ideal citizens, and the propaganda was showing us in the mirror of the screen whom we were supposed to become. Yeah. And Nostalgia for the Future is a film that was really exploring that imagination of Indian citizenship.
Uh-huh.
It was imagined by the state. Okay. Now, the curious thing about that imagination of the state is that it emerged from a very sort of bourgeois middle class, the idealized citizen. And it was that particular idealized citizen, a bourgeois middle class citizen, who was seen as the idealized inhabitation of Indian citizenship,
A
which,
re-origination.
Like,
which actually was us, the professionals, engineers, doctors, architects, us. In many ways, it was us speaking to us. The filmmakers who are making those images as well belong to the same class and probably caste as I did. Okay. I was also watching it, saying, yeah, this is how we should be. So it was
I can
many ways
totally
really-
relate to this now.
yeah.
that's what we are supposed to become.
Right.
That's so when we decided to make Nostalgia for the Future, and we were exploring that image of who we were supposed to become through architecture and through film, in many ways what we were doing was it was a self-portrait. Because the film was about ourselves as architects and as filmmakers, as middle class bourgeois imaginations, and our middle class bourgeois imaginations of what constitutes Indian modernity. And we are very conscious of that when we begin to make a film for the damn propaganda wing of India.
Okay. It's almost like an internal critique,
Yes, it was
institutional critique.
Yeah.
imagined as an internal critique within the film itself. So now, when you talk about performance, and I then think about the film, what we were performing, okay, was the voiceover. The
Right.
voiceover that we had in the film was a Hindi voiceover that was usually in state Hindi,
Yeah.
slightly on the kind of flowery slides.
Doordarshan.
Adhunikta. Yes, that. Yeah.
There's certain kind of efflorescence, I guess you could call it. And that was the voice we chose to inhabit. Okay, in the film. It's our voice speaking in that voice. It's I like the idea of ventriloquism. We're using that voice to say something. But what happens in the film, actually, towards the end especially, is that voice begins to destabilize. It doesn't know what it says anymore. It just starts getting confused. Especially at the end. I don't know whether you guys remember the end, but because at the end, that voice comes to realize that it has actually been speaking only to itself. That famous sequence. Okay, should I go through that sequence?
Please,
Yeah,
again?
please,
yeah.
please do it. Do it.
We've
yeah.
seen them fairly
Movie.
recently,
Yeah.
but
Okay. So
we'd
you
love
remember-
you to narrate.
So you remember Dilip Kumar at the end of the
Yeah.
film?
Yeah.
The clip from the film Amar. That's how the entire end is set up. Actually, it begins with that.
Yeah.
That's a extraordinarily interesting film. It's a film that is made, I think, 1954 or so, if I'm not wrong. And Dilip Kumar plays a lawyer, and as a lawyer, he represents, I think, middle class India, but not just middle class India. He is also Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Nehru, all lawyers.
All together, yeah.
So what the film does is this, right? It takes this figure of the lawyer, the modern, and it brings him to the village, the tribal world of the village, where he sees this extremely beautiful, exotic woman who's a tribal girl. And he's fascinated by her because she represents a certain kind of truth. And she is fascinated by him because he represents a certain kind of modernity.
Right.
And that encounter between them is played out for the sort of erotic charge that it has for a while. Until one night there's a storm and this woman is being stalked by another man from the village. So she doesn't know where else to run. So she runs into the home of the modernizer. Thinking that, he's cool. He will save me. And what happens there, of course, is that the modernizer was absolutely fine as long as the wild stayed outside his home. When the wild enters his home, he doesn't know what else to do. So he destroys it by raping her.
Okay.
This is the first 40 minutes of the film, but let's say first half of the film. The rest of the film is the modernizer, the middle class bourgeois modernizer, professional, feeling guilty about the fact that his value systems and the way that he actually practiced were at odds with each other.
Or kind of a paradox.
Yeah.
A serious one. It really goes at the heart of Indian modernity.
जब वकील एक गांव आया तो अपने साथ प्रगति और आधुनिकता के विचार लाया। वहां बीहड़ में उसे एक अल्हड़ सुंदर युवती मिली जिसका आकर्षण वकील की समझ के बाहर था। एक रात खतरे से भागती उस युवती को अपनी शरण में पाकर अपनी असंगत भावनाओं से विवश वो उस युवती के विरुद्ध हो गया।
यहाँ क्यों आई हो?
और उसने उसका नाश कर दिया।
Because that's actually what happens to even the stable voiceover in the film Nostalgia. The voiceover now says, "Kya yaar, ho kya raha hai?" You know, in this silence, in this emptiness, when we are looking at the kind of development in Gurgaon as the end, fields and stuff, mustard fields. And he says that, you know, "Shayad meri awaaz hi mera ghar hai." You know, there's a sort of where the voice and the home tend to collapse into each other, and everything ends up becoming a void, actually.
Yeah.
And in that void, there seems to be at some point that where do we stand? What is our role anymore? Are we even relevant anymore? And then you have the end sequence. And then at the end you have this the end sequence, which is of course that we have these beautiful, you know, sunset light in Gurgaon, high rises in the background, silver tin huts in the foreground, catching beautiful evening light, and little boys, you know, children and slum kids are so cute, right? They are up in front. And it's such a gorgeous cliche upon which we could end the film. Dekho kitna dukh hai zindagi mein. And that would be such a classic way in which any films division film would end, or any documentary would end. But there was something deeply, deeply uncomfortable about that image for us. So what we decided to do at that point is use that to really, in many ways, do a critique of the position of the bourgeois intellectual modern man. So what we did is this. Mukul then takes out, you see him do it, right? You see in the cell phone footage. Mukul kind of putting a film, celluloid camera, and shooting gorgeous grainy black and white images of these same boys. So we are turning that exotic image into even more exotica. And what we do then is get these kids, and these kids are just staring at you. And we chose to just stop all sound entirely.
No content.
There's no sound. So the only sound that you have is actually silence and the sound of the creaking of the chairs of the audience, because they then begin to fill up that space. They inhabit, in other words, that world. And what happens there is that we have this gaze, and this gaze is a strange gaze. The kids are looking at you and thinking, "Yaar, tu hota kaun hai? Mujhe kuch batane." It's not a violent gaze. It's just a sort of quizzical. Who are you? Who am I? Whom do you want me to become? What should I perform myself as for you? This camera that is telling me, "Main karu kya?" And we are on this side as middle class bourgeois professionals saying, "Yeah, perform something for us." That's the end. Until,
It's a
of
kind
course,
of privilege and curiosity tension.
so there's a tension in that entire class caste separation. That is mediated by that instrument of image making,
The tool
specialized.
kind of. Yeah.
And that then of course breaks into the end, which is the girls playing the drums below the flyover in Bombay. um, and we felt that it was important to kind of allow for that to happen, because it seemed to us that there were modernities that we did not necessarily understand, trained in a certain way, certain kinds of inhabitations that were also releases of the modern, but in formations that were not recognizable and continue to be illegible to many ways in which we see the modern in the world.
Right.
Unfortunately, too many times when we see them, we usually fall into the binaries of saying, "Oh, this is illegal or whatever. It's noisy and it needs to be. This is not modern. It's like tribal almost." And that is one imagination. The other one is, of course, saying, "Oh, how interesting! Look at these amazing things that they're doing. Oh, such exciting, wonderful, dynamic cities."
Such a surprising element in
Yeah,
these
oh, still
exotic.
eruption,
Yeah.
all of
It's
that.
shocking. It was amazing.
It's like that. So we felt that it was important to kind of allow for that also to kind of erupt. To just leave it open for us to start thinking about maybe to reconsider imaginations of the modern. That's actually what they. So when you spoke about the idea of performance, in many ways, nostalgia for the future is us performing ourselves.
I mean, I think somewhere there was a presentation which we happened to see. You also state these kind of 4 levels, the body, the home, the city, and then the nation, right? And this paradox comes to the fore when we imagine that this apparatus for becoming modern, instructed upon by by Jawaharlal Nehru's first government, and that kind of plan when films division is really sort of articulating this this toolkit or this tool set for the modern citizen to emerge, but it somehow doesn't include in these 4 layers the rural in a way, one. And on the other end, you see, if you look back at history, that the Nehru government is also one of the those first 15 years is when agriculture and reform and rural reform is like really put into so much pressure, and there is like pressure as in so much
Steam gathers a lot of steam.
It catches a lot of steam in that sense. So is there a sort of position on this kind of this paradox that kind of appeared, or did you confront it in any way?
I mean, the metonym of body, home, city, world,
Yeah.
was used as a way to really talk about the fact that there was a utopian imagination that's at stake.
Yeah.
And in utopias, there is very rarely any slippage between these. It's imagined that one neatly flits into the other.
There's no give. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the way that the metonym was played with. And we spoke of the metonym in 3-4 different ways across the whole. The first one was the kind of idea of the performing body. The second one was the naked body. The third one was the bodiless body or fleshless body, which is mathematical.
They'll call it virtual these days.
No, it's not virtual really. It's abstract rather. The abstract
Body.
That is one. That was one entire story. The idea of the city, though, and the rural, I'm not very certain that I think in that utopian imagination of neat fits, okay, the village was also supposed to play a certain role.
Okay.
It existed. It's not as if it didn't exist in that hierarchy.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm just saying that maybe it existed not necessarily within. When we speak of city, we are not necessarily talking the sheher. We are talking about the idea of the collective, actually, in some sense.
Okay.
The city as an idea.
Kind of socialization is more central to that. I quickly want to go, not necessarily back to that conversation per se, but I quickly want to ask, so when you talk about films division and the idea of the Indian state coming up with this particular institution that must produce the propaganda that they at least believe is their agenda instead of a sort of fake propaganda. They actually believe it's quite an authentic way of educating our newly formed populace, and the Indian peoples must find what they must find. And what I want to go back to with this in mind is a comment about the collectives within Mumbai, at least coming kind of organically organizing themselves without very, very clearly defined agendas. Do you think this is mildly reactionary to our social democratic system that existed till 92? That Indian thought today, or at least since both of us know Mumbai much better, is it something that is a reaction to that, where we kind of are maybe slightly allergic to coining a new term and writing a whole thesis and discussing a thought for 20 years among various collectives and saying, no, I mean, subaltern is probably not the only thing we can come up with. There are more to us that we can
I think there are many, many different sorts of ideas that are in the air. I think especially with over the past 6-7 years, with the new government's new policies, the political has taken center stage in much of the conversations concerning citizenship, concerning identity, concerning. I think one of the great resurgences in Ambedkar is really part of that story. I think. Revisiting some of the presumptions and some of the main values that existed within the construction of the Indian state and the idea of the Indian citizen. If Nostalgia for the Future has done all the screenings that it has, I think Nostalgia for the Future also emerged because of that particular crisis. It emerges because of the questions of citizenship and identity become central again to who we are. And in many ways, it's making a lot of us go back to the Nehruvian era and look upon it again, away from the sort of cynicism that was very much part of the way we saw it in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. To start thinking about it in new terms, thinking about the ways in which there was an attempt to construct an Indian citizenship, a certain idea of who we were. It failed. It did fail in many ways, but it also was very successful in many ways.
It was, yeah. From what we read, at least.
Yeah, we tend to focus a lot on the fact of the failures, which we should, but we should also recognize that it was able in many ways to create institutional systems as well as methods through which many people managed to access modernity.
सफ़ेद पोशाक में इंजीनियर साहब आए, दाढ़ी बनाकर, साफ सुथरे सफ़ेद, पूर्णिमा के चांद की तरह सफ़ेद। इनके हाथों हमारा उद्धार लिखा था। इनका अस्त्र, इनकी बुद्धिमत्ता, जो अव्यवस्था से व्यवस्था छीन लाती, सतह देखकर भीतर की गहराई भांप लेती। इनका अस्त्र विज्ञान। आधुनिकता की कल्पना नागरिकों के एकजुट होकर एक ही समय काल में अपने इतिहास और भूगोल की भिन्नता मिटाकर सांस से सांस मिलाकर काम करने में है। विविधता और समानता की धुंधली रेखाएं पहचानने में है।
when you say that there are all these new people or sometimes even newer ideas about people from our history that are being discussed, somehow aesthetics does not get foregrounded, does it, in
That's
these
been
discussions?
I would
There's
agree
no
with you.
art movement, or not movement. I'm not calling for a new movement. I'm
Yeah.
saying
No
there's
need for isms. Yeah.
yeah, no need for isms. But when you mention we must write new histories, one of the things I would say are crucial to be able to write a history is to have an aesthetic reading of something where there are sort of speculations on why or what exactly drew attention.
I mean, I see. I'm not an art theorist or an art historian,
Sure.
but I do know that there have been people who, I think, in the 90s and the 2000s, who are trying to, in many ways, grapple with with the contemporary art scene. At least, I'm not. I wouldn't. I'm not an expert, but I know friends who are. I guess maybe they would be better to kind of talk about it in terms of what are the sorts of things that they are interested in. I mean, but to kind of take your point kind of a little further,
Sure.
there is a point I think that you have about the way that we always frame our own work that we do within the terms of the international sort of market for ideas as well.
Markets, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Market for ideas as well, no? So I think that, but the question really I have is that how else does one do that?
Yeah.
Is actually, no, which language do we choose to speak in? This is the, I mean, I would hesitate to call Indian academia subaltern because really it's highly Brahminical and very
Absolutely.
but still, even given the fact that within the international academic scene you do inhabit a margin, and if you think about the way that Spivak Gayatri frames the argument about speaking, and then you think about and if you use a similar sort of imagination to think about the way that the subaltern, I hate that word. I hate using it for myself actually because it's not necessarily true.
Absolutely.
But but if you think about it, she effectively makes an argument that says that to speak one has to don the language of the people in power. Then what do you do? To be heard, if those are the only languages that are then available to you,
Because
and
the
if the language itself is one that only allows a certain kind of power to emerge,
Yeah.
then is silence the only option? Or is denial the other option? Or is, I mean, even
absolute
violence,
rejection. Yeah.
absolute rejection is the only absolute rejection is silence, actually. So that is a kind of so I mean, it's a difficult question because I very often find that to be so, especially because you get called to different places to present, no, like
Right.
you're presenting all these various people, no, and then you have to then you have to kind of make something legible to somebody else, you know? And in the making of the legible, you are in many ways actually speaking in the language of something else about something
Adopting.
needs another language or needs another institutional system entirely of validation. But because we are playing to this particular system, this market, the commodity has to be produced in the terms of this market.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
why
the other.
I find nostalgia for the future and also especially with the clarity that you've brought now to be really special work because it does this. It almost critiques this idea of appropriating language and all its problematics with power and all its problems with aesthetics and puts it as a foreground. This is the one thing that I'm guessing would be easier for you to present, in a way because
So even the language, we found that very important for nostalgia, right? Because first of all, we didn't expect the film to be shown in places where people wouldn't understand Hindi or people wouldn't know Indian history. Actually, we didn't expect that wasn't a film that we made with an audience in mind. Actually, we made the film because it was the film we wanted to make. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Very naive thing to say, but that's literally the truth. I don't think people very often ask you that question in a Q&A. Who was your intended audience? And I actually don't necessarily have an answer to that, because it was actually a film that was made as a conversation between people who share a certain history. So I presume that it was meant for people in India,
Yeah.
to some extent. But then again, you guys belong to a generation that doesn't share the same history as I do, and this film is very much about a particular history of being in
A very
being in it.
specific one. Yeah.
But what I found is that somehow, because of, I guess, the mode of the making of the film, which is montage largely and voiceover, that it seems to hit a chord somewhere. Like some things seem to resonate with different people in different parts of the world. So the film has actually it's traveled so much that I'm still constantly amazed by the fact that this film that doesn't bother to tell you who Ambedkar is,
Or Gandhi, for that matter.
or Gandhi, or Nehru. It drops these names and moves on. Is being seen in I don't know, Mexico, and like I'm still wondering, like, like, what do they get from it? It's like a question. But then I realized that I was being naive. Actually, we never ask those questions for fiction films. Fiction films often present very specific realities of people who are not like us.
Yeah.
People in, I don't know, Morocco and I don't know, Italy, Thailand or wherever.
Yeah.
But yet somehow we find ways of enriching our own kind of experience of that by mirroring ourselves within those spaces.
Right.
And the film allows you to do that. And I think that's what films do. It doesn't have to, is that we find what we want to within the work.
Projecting into a different sort of reality.
We make it our own in many ways.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I think this is also a great point to go back to academia and your academic work. I have spoken to Chirag a lot about some of the
Study trips
and projects that you guys have taken, and I think it's really personally for me, I've enjoyed learning while, as naive as it sounds, while outside. There is an absolute commitment to our modes of production, that is drawing or whatever it is, drawing, modeling, all kinds of new tools that exist. But there is really something about standing in a building and thinking about that formal organization or whatever aesthetic set of effects, and contemplating precisely what might be going on there, and I think these, especially the ones in Majuli that I heard about. My first question, which Chirag often talks, my first question is more about what does a student from Mumbai do when they arrive in Majuli? What's the confrontation like? Because I'm imagining, I often tell Chirag that the people of Majuli, were they looking at you guys and going, oh, these are those people that live in one house that lasts for 40 years? Because we all went to Majuli saying, oh, these people build a new house every year?
It's
You
that
know? What's that confrontation like?
Yeah.
It was hilarious. I remember, first of all, it took forever to get there. 3 trains.
It was a
on board.
4-day travel.
It was hell. And we had people from Chirag's batch, with these beautiful, large, glowing... Sorry. And Chirag's batch is particularly interesting because it had these real divas, all over, boys as well as girls. And all these divas are being taken across the country in a train, and being asked to kind of lift bags, put bags. I mean, it was like an entire process of
Driver, हमारी गाड़ी ले आओ.
I am too close to this to not enjoy this conversation, not consume.
I want to hear more.
But
I
go
want to
ahead.
hear more.
Shirish, Paul, me, and I just laughing away at these women and these boys with these big bags, and they come completely prepared with different kinds of shoes and stuff. Okay, it was hilarious. And then you come to Majuli, and we are living in a hotel that is still not completed. It's under construction. The boys have to sleep in an auditorium, okay, which is a common toilet, and the girls get these rooms, whatever. That evening that we arrive there, this class asks for a meeting. Okay, we have to talk to you. So like, okay, chalo, we'll talk to them. And I don't know whether Chirag told you, but they were working with the Guwahati School of Art, students from the Guwahati School of Architecture. So that's one room. And one room is there, the dining room. All these kids are sitting, our students are sitting on the floor, okay, below. The Guwahati students are in a ring around them, staring at these strange Bombay creatures with their really big bags. And the faculty sitting on chairs in a long lines looking at them. And it begins. And by the way, it had rained, I think, the previous night.
Yeah.
So there were these black insects, that happened. And there were tube lights. So there were black insects everywhere in the room.
Yeah. Especially in the toilets. I remember there were 4 toilets and the tube lights were covered by them. Anyways, continue.
So
it was amazing.
That's the situation. That's what Majuli is now what to do. It's not very, you're not going to get anything better than that. That was the best that was possible. And these guys just like go on a rampage. What kind of place have you gotten us to? What kind of stupid place is this? They don't even have toilets and they're serving water out of a broken or a rusted something. It was one long tirade that just went on. And at the end, and those Guwahati students are staring at them, right? Because that's their world. And these guys are just giving galis to their world, okay? To everything that they're inhabiting with absolutely no shame whatsoever.
I want to speak to your manager kind of attitude.
Really, totally. I was and very privileged, very smug. Okay. And
it was excessive.
I was livid, actually. We were all very angry, but also very amused because we found the whole thing very entertaining. And then I think we fired them or something like that. If I'm not
yeah. It was a proper. It was a proper session. I remember.
Yeah,
it was
laundromat session.
Yeah, you humiliate them and you do emotional blackmail and you anger. You do all the things that your teacher that you're supposed to do. You do all of the above.
Yeah.
We send them back. 6 days they're in that place, going to these satras, wearing their dhotis and their mekla chadars. And at the end of which, they're like, oh, thank you so much. What a wonderful place. It is so beautiful. There's such wonderful people. I was like, one way or the other, please make up.
The best thing was that after the first night, after all this happens, the second night happens. I think you remember this, is that those Guwahati students start bringing meat and start bringing other things to barbecue. And there are these huge sessions outside with the bonfire and everything. And these guys are khurchi bolte hain wo jo
bihu dance and
they have everything happening and we are like enmeshed. By now it is like arey chicken de raha hai. Okay, everything unites with this idea of this barbecue that is happening here, and then it's all gone.
But I mean, I think actually for me, what is actually, if you ask me personally, besides the main measure drawings that happened in Majuli, the projects that these guys did were very below par. Yeah, bluntly, I have to tell you, they were not great at all. They were very ordinary, I felt. But the measure drawings were superb. They were really, really, really nicely done. And I felt like the act of making those drawings itself, physically sitting and sleeping on those drawings, making those stupid stipples and those trees, although it was live, quite unnecessarily labor intensive, was actually fantastic, because I think you learn so much by that labor, that your body learns labor, which I felt was really wonderful thing that happened there. That was great fun, and that entire way back also was crazy.
Because it somehow for me there's a common thread with you as an actor. Between especially just in our conversation today, when you bring up that particular instance where the Dutch arrived in Bombay and now going through all the aspects of our conversation, we've arrived at a point where the Assamese are standing in a ring looking at Indian creatures. I think in all your work, there is this common thread of that the complete disturbance that the idea of identity already has, where someone like you, would you ever bother worrying about what's called today cultural appropriation? Does it matter to you? Would you worry
it
about
doesn't
it?
bother. It doesn't bother me. In fact, actually, I get annoyed with people who believe that there is only one identity that I inhabit. I've never inhabited only one identity. I think actually, as a queer person, one is I find that to be more and more important nowadays. To be able to really think about if you're growing up queer in Bombay or in India or in the world, there is no other. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. There's no person that you can look up to. You don't exist, my friend. There's no person on the other side of the damn mirror. Try and understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. And if that person exists, that person is just a strange kind of creature. You know, like to be
Almost a
discarded.
shadow.
Whatever, right? You have a certain kind of demonization,
Right.
of that very figure, and that itself. So what does that do actually? Because finally, to be, you have to kind of constantly. You need mirrors, no, around you.
Yeah.
So what you do is that you start you start donning fragmented mirrors. Is that you start making up identities. You take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and then you start kind of performing these different sorts of imaginations. So I've never had what they call a hero or a, what do you call the mentor? or
Idol.
anything.
Yeah.
Never had. They are all like whatever. But I've had many people whom I've stolen from or learned from, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what being queer allows you to do. It allows you to construct your own sense of identity. And that construction of identity doesn't happen in a void. It happens by stealing. Okay. It happens because there's no one is giving it to you. For God's sakes, you have to steal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, architecture also, in learning architecture also, we grew up being told, draw a drawing by a famous guy and see what you can steal.
Yeah. So I don't have. So when I think about cultural appropriation and all of those things, right, I think that actually some of the greatest work I love, most of the work I love, happens when cultures mix and collapse and corrupt each other. No? Like rock music. I love rock music because of that, actually. You know, the work of whatever, MIA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's full of these sorts of collapses which are so incredibly exciting.
Queen.
A city like Bombay is so alive because of these collapses. Those don't happen because of like unified identities. It's through only these sorts of pollutions and corruptions really that energies come. So when I think about this idea of kind of identity politics, I understand why it's necessary. Okay, I understand why it's necessary because it's important to don that identity to be able to claim a right. So whether you're whether that's a queer identity, but to imagine that I am only that would be reducing the possibilities of what I can be to being merely that. And I don't ever want to do that to myself.
Right.
I want to be able to enjoy a Rajnikant film, and I want to be able to enjoy a Tarkovsky film, and I want to be able to listen to Hindi film music, and I want to be able to listen to whatever, I want to allow myself the possibility of being multiple people.
Yeah, Chirag and I have a very almost unhealthy obsession with Qawwali at the moment.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
We love it.
I mean, I think I think it just makes your life more pleasurable, and you seem to enjoy much more. And you also are, and also it allows me to be a little more generous to people.
But Rohan, you would never say there is bad stealing. I'm not suggesting ethics here. I'm saying taking aspects of different works and trying to produce and create something. But no, there must be a value scale or a value system of figuring out
Values
which
are
cultural object.
Yeah, I agree.
is there a critical mass of subjectivities in a way?
Yeah.
You know?
No, see, I would say that, like, I'm kind of I'm saying this, it's absolutely amazing to kind of steal things and stuff like that. But yes, one has to be, one has to understand also, okay, that there are works that come out of very particular sorts of histories. If one is going to be stealing from them, one has to also keep in mind that you're also stealing a part of that history, and it is important to acknowledge that. It's important to know that that the work is not only image that you can happily appropriate and do whatever you want to. That it comes holding something at the back, and it's important to know that.
Or to terrible word, but use it as that it would provide a new meaning to it, or a
Those things may have,
reinterpretation.
yeah, but it also there is a point where you need to understand that your own position comes from a certain position of power that is allowing you to appropriate things.
Absolutely.
Many people do not necessarily have that possibility. I belong to a certain place where I am allowed that freedom to appropriate. There are people who do not necessarily have the position where they are not allowed to, where every single thing that is theirs is really theirs and they really want to hold on to it. It would be stupid of me to simply come and take it and, kind of play with it just because I can. So that kind of respect should be there, I think. I mean, one can't, but one can also kind of be respectful of it and also find what one wants to within it. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think that's the kind of world that I would like to imagine can exist. And actually, that's really the way that people work in the world. If you look like TikTok videos and you look at things like that, they are they are voicing their own desires through many other people's voices all the time. They are appropriating other people's faces, other people's music, and they are making them their own with their own bodies.
And how do you qualify this when it happens in your, let's say, design studio? When a student expresses a kind of a very specific fascination, how do you ask them to identify its qualities and then work with it?
I mean, what you do is that if a guy gets your Remkulas building and says, "Mujhe na ye banana hai, dost," then you're like, "Acha, ye Cochin mein banana hai." I'm like, "Kyun?" Very simply, the site is there, na.
Yeah.
The site is there, the presence is there, the love for that place is there, the love for those people is there. And if the Remkulas building is going to be able to do that, then go ahead. Kya problem hai? But it won't, na. It won't. It can't. It will change. It has to change. Because there is the site, there is the presence of that particular. The presence of the particular cannot allow for a generic transportation of something else here. And if it does, even that is supremely strange. Like the miniature Eiffel Tower in China.
How does that come
But how would the student think? Because we often, Chirag and I often try to go back to those moments where we've come across these discussions, and because our thoughts are more about, okay, if it can't or can, how do we gauge that? How do we learn to see it happen in front of our eyes? We want to know what constitutes reading this kind of appropriation. How do you read something pro appropriation? When you want to appropriate something, when you're reading it, what do you tell your students? Like, it's not going to work on the site, and if the student says, but why? I mean, it's a building. If I can fit it in.
I think there is also this question about
Just bring the presence of the site. It's actually not that difficult to do. We just bring the presence of the site, the tangibility and the concreteness of that particular moment and space and time.
Okay.
Once that exists, those communities exist, that climate exists, all of those exist. You have that, na? That will automatically weigh the particular down. It's not easy to simply kind of take Villa Savoy and dump it, even in Alibag, actually.
Yeah.
It's difficult to do.
I think it's about, so I will ask one question just now. It's like there is this in most of your lectures you talk about or even when we were in school there was also there was always a description of spaces, you know, as a um as a body that has to be given some kind of articulation through architecture in that sense. Now we've come across people who talk of that term, that body being the room itself, you know, not spaces, rooms. Do you look at, and it's not merely those functional rooms, you know,
Yeah.
the
Colloquially, we would say, are you a space guy or a room guy? You know,
Yeah,
something about when you see a plan,
Yeah.
there is the poche, and then there is the space, and then there is what the French call the poche, the black, the unknowable part of architecture that you can only know its sort of skin, right? Because you can experience it from both sides, the inside and the outside in a plan, but you cannot actually know what exactly is in the wall once it's packed.
yeah.
So are you a space person or a room person?
Space.
Space.
Yeah. And I've been accused of being a romantic, a phenomenological romantic, touchy-feely and and all of the above. I'm actually fairly, I think, I love the feeling of wind against my face and water. And I think space guy. If I have to choose between the two, yes, space guy.
Yeah.
I try to kind of I try to not get into the essentializations of things that
Right.
Yeah.
that, oh my god, it's dark so it's sad and it's bright so it's happy. Not that.
Yeah.
Just like the experience of something. I would like to be more of a space guy.
I think the idea is also to look at it as a more as a practice of a rhetoric. No, matlab, we know that the space and the room is no kind of binary, but what? Yeah.
I know it's a dialectical, but you know, you have to choose a side and choose one.
ठीक
It's
है.
simple. I choose the more embodied rather than the abstracted. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
One of the problems I have with what we were discussing earlier, parametricism, is that it's all abstract and no embodiment, largely. And that's why I said space guy and not a form guy. Because if parametricism does much, it makes forms. It doesn't make spaces.
And because especially, I'm also thinking while this conversation is happening, and now it also somehow feels, I don't know if ironic is a good word, but somehow feels a little bit ironic that you are a space guy. That means you refuse to allow only your visual senses to dominate. You must experience through as many senses as you can conjure, but your second love, let's say, is films.
Yeah, but films are not about only the visual. I think to kind of separate the senses themselves into these clear sorts of categories itself is also not very useful in many ways.
Okay.
That I think when you're watching a Tarkovsky film and you're hearing the water, there is a liquidity that is very much part of that feeling that you're getting. The visual and the oral is able to translate many different sorts of ideas, because our memories in many ways are able to connect the sound of water to the feeling of water. It's not the idea of experience doesn't only exist at a particular space and time; it is also collected over time.
Right.
So memory also plays an important role in the way one really kind of like very simply put, when when you hear a particular piece of music, let's say you're hearing it at that time, but what you're hearing is actually your memory of that music that you heard when you were 3 years old, and then you can see that space at that time.
Yeah.
You can feel yourself in that time. So when one thinks about experience is not only the body; the experience is also the mind.
Sure. I mean, I was also, I guess we often end up micro-analyzing, and these are great conversations where we can also sort of clear up some of our own trash, Chirag and I.
Yeah.
But I guess it's great to sort of hear from you that the camera need not be such a subjugative force when it comes to how you think about cinema and how you think about making cinema. And because we are a generation that saw the Chirag and I are from the generation that experienced, while in academics, the switch between जाओ site के photos लेके आओ, click pictures of the site, and where is your Google Earth image? I want to see what is around the site.
Yeah.
And I think there is something there, for at least for us, that is a very interesting shift. We want to know the difference between how cameras from the turn of the 20th century have seen cities and cities have been shown, and what the shift means when it comes to satellite imagery. Because architecture seems to be one of the few professions that, apart from travel apps, Uber and things like that, that uses satellite imagery in a very, very enthusiastic way.
It's a way of seeing, na? And I think that it's let's put it this way, is that the way you see is also tells you the way that you imagine, the mode through which you intervene, and it's actually both together, no?
Yeah.
If you think about the fact that the modern movement is paralleled with the rise of the flying machine, the fact that one can suddenly see from the sky, and or even if you start thinking about the invention of perspective in the Renaissance as the primary mode through which we understand space, also starts creating in the later era the Baroque axes, perhaps, that ran through cities, or the perfect geometries in buildings. If one is to able to, and so this, the level of the ways in which one see create a mode through which one can begin to conceptualize space, I presume. And if you're asking me, what does it mean when we conceptualize space only through Google Earth? It's a good question. I wouldn't know. I think that right now we are doing a project that's completely on Google Earth because my students couldn't go to site. It's unfortunate. They're all in lockdown. And it is a struggle to get them to start thinking about embodiment. And I am, like I said, I'm a space guy, right? So I really believe in the tangibility of specific locations and light and shadow and materialities.
Right.
I'm not a function guy. I don't think I think functionalism is a little overrated. I don't think it's there's too much of this bubble diagramming and volumetric that happens. I think it's all quite. It makes the worst architecture I have seen. But I do believe that there is a certain that every location has a certain energy, and I don't mean a spiritual energy, but just plain tangible thing that I don't think one can really get on a satellite image. I've seen too many of these guys and the projects that they're doing right now. That imagine that since you're seeing things on Google Earth, your design process can also effectively completely be digital. And what the digital does is that the digital doesn't necessarily deal with two things for me very well yet. Maybe in the future it will, but right now, the idea of scale is something that is almost impossible in the digital realm because
you can zoom.
So you're never getting a sense of the scale at which you're working. And the other one is the natural one, which is tangibility, materiality. The materials, what I'm seeing, the way that people are using them, is that they're either these preset forms that come within some software preset, or it is a rendering on a surface. So you make a shape and then you render it in brick or render it in something.
Application.
In which case, it's no thickness and there's no weight to the material. It's just pure surface. Which I think are issues as far as the making of architecture is concerned. However, I know that so much architecture is already being made and built like that around the world now. Completely digitalized, with all kinds of rationalizations that emerge from things like the parametrics and stuff like that. Where a universal imagination of technology and a universal imaginations of form are uh, are the generators of buildings.
Right.
Multi practices where one firm in kind of Thailand is putting together the windows and another firm somewhere else is putting together the toilet plans. Things are being done like that. No?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of mode of practice can only lead to a certain kind of architecture,
Yeah.
which is architecture of the Google Earth.
No, I think
But well, that is very much what's happening.
I think also there is something that we both kind of talk about also, is this kind of the idea of even at the scale of the student, this kind of regime of visualization. When we were studying, even the second year or the third year projects, there was the class of 80 would find a sort of way in which a drawing is made and rendered, with or without computer, for that matter, in the early years without computer, and subsequently with. And then we see these very sort of fashion trend kind of appearances. Like in this today's case, you can say it's this post-digital rendering, something like that it's called. You put these textures in flat on the
Blendage.
surfaces, and then you give a lot of disturbance to the textures, and how you go about it. So is there something to be said about this kind of trending hashtagging of going back to the earlier thing that you were talking about, because architecture is slow, but हमें कुछ करने के लिए चाहिए, that sort of a thing. Does it come from that frustration?
I think that every discipline is going to have its own sorts of ticks. The drawing is the architectural one. We love drawings. It's our thing. And I love drawings too.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's gorgeous things. Not just, they are full of there's beauty to those, all kinds of drawings. I think there's also something so desperate about a drawing that there is reality. It exists. It's all its complexity. And the drawing is desperately trying to capture it on a plate. It's like, it's almost sad that it's bound for failure. What I like about drawings is that of the kinds of drawings I like is that they accept the failure. And what they do is that they try and make the best. They use the abstraction of the representation itself as a mode to narrate something particular about the world outside. So I love that tension that's always in the air as far as the drawing and the reality. The tension between them is always very, very interesting, I think. What has and yeah, there are, unlike most other commodities, the architectural drawing also has a certain things come in fashion and go out of fashion, and there's always a cycle as far as that is concerned. I'm not too concerned about that. That will happen. What is more interesting is that the way in which one can think about the way in which one can deploy drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Like how does one choose to draw a particular thing? When we do our study trips, that's always a big discussion.
Mm-hmm.
What is the right mode of drawing? When we went to, do you know about Chakrata, the study trip that we had done? No, you probably don't.
No, that one, I think by then I had already graduated.
It was very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. With every study trip, actually, after your class, we explored new kinds of
Techniques
drawings.
of drawing, yeah.
Drawings, yeah.
It was a very important thing. When we went to Braj and we did the Parikrama drawing, we chose miniatures actually as the mode, miniatures and Nilima shape drawings, paintings. But when we went to Chakrata, I was really pissed, okay, because we had done Lucknow and we had done Allahabad, beautiful cities, lovely architecture, certain scale. And then one of our faculty members said we should go to Chakrata. And Chakrata is like a bunch of villages with vernacular architecture. And I was like, oh no, we are not going to become Sept again. Doing vernacular.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. I hate the fetishization of that damn vernacular building. Acting as if it is representative of something truthful and honest.
Yeah.
It's really. So,
Sadgis.
like,
Kenneth
itna
Frampton.
because I don't think it's true only. And besides which, it kind of really imagines a certain kind of purity that I have a serious problem with. Because
Yeah.
to imagine that Indian villages are pure would be in many ways to deny their caste and their gender issues.
Or many other, I mean, gangs of Wasipur.
Yeah.
Come on.
I was so pissed off. But I was like, but they said, nahi, abhi jana hi padega. So I was like, theek hai, we'll go. But I thought what we'll do is that we'll take the word vernacular and we will break it open. What is the vernacular? So we said that the vernacular is actually the vernacular comes from what language people speak on the ground. That's as simple as that. It's not that's as simple as that. Na? And if you think about languages we use in everyday life are constantly morphing and changing. Simple. So what we thought we'll do, and they're morphing and changing because of different influences in space and time. And in Jakarta, those villages themselves are always morphing and changing because they live in one village in the summer and another village in the winter. Literally, the community. They're always moving. So what we thought we'll do is that really start looking at the relationship of architecture to everyday life. But it is a measure drawing. Second year. And measure drawings tend to really fixate on wall sections and all of that stuff. Very, very much object oriented. So what we decided to do is that say that ठीक है measure drawing तो करेंगे, but what we'll do is that we wanted to look at the rhythms of everyday life and space and time movement. Na? And we felt that the best example for that is a comic book actually, because comic books do that. Comic books are able to collapse space, collapse time, stretch space, stretch time. So we said that what we'll do is that we'll make a drawing that splices together comic book techniques with measure drawing techniques. So we then evolved a mode of showing measure drawings, conventional measure drawings actually, they have all sections and all of the above. But every single one of these drawings is integrated with a narrative of people's lives. So what happens in a case like this is that the drawing emerges out of a question. We are learning from different types, but we are choosing what to learn because there's something in particular that we want to ask.
Oh, wow.
Or explain.
Really, it's almost like a screenplay of a building.
Yeah, exactly what it was actually. So you're able to see like if there's wood, then where does the wood come from, where the forest is, and how it is used. So it's all of that stuff, but it's all through measure drawings.
Yeah, the
Axonometry
technique itself sounds amazing. Yeah. Great. But of course, we want to know, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, I'm just curious as to how, this is just something I've been thinking about. No, how do you place yourselves as architects working in Germany? Actually, this is something that, because you're asking me to ask, wow. Because does race play an important part of your identity then?
It's something that's never, I have to say, and not just diplomatically, I have to say, we are very lucky where we work.
Yeah.
People are amazing. Very interesting work also. Interesting the way they consider the techniques that we use, the way they consider the digital. It's not exactly completely all about which software are we working on. Somehow everything collapses into a discussion about qualities. And that's the most fun part of working in this office. Race per se doesn't play any direct role, almost negligible in everyday life. It's difficult to, at least personally, I hate trying to figure out if someone is racist. I just hate that.
Yeah.
So unless something is overtly done to me, I think it's happened once where I was at a train station and someone just spit in my face. out of nothing. And that one's very easy to deal with because
I don't mean such an overt sort of movement
Yeah,
of racism. What I mean is, because I'll tell you from my experience when I was in America. Maybe that's what I meant. I mean, it's a different generation, right? So you
Right.
see yourselves differently. But when I was in America, we had this exercise in a studio where a white boy and me, we had to stand at two ends of it was a sort of social architectural something. Stand at two ends of a room, and we had to keep walking one step towards each other, and we had to keep looking in each other's eyes. That's what the exercise was. And we had to tell people what we were thinking. And what happened is that we kept walking, and at some point, that guy says, "I just can't walk anymore." And they asked why, and he said it's because of whatever, two men, same room, same eye contact, all of those things, the homophobia issue, whatever. While for me, my entire sort of reaction was based on the fact that I was self-conscious of being brown. Nobody had done anything. Understand? It was my own sorts of imagination of identity, okay, that I felt like, yeah, I am maybe coming too close for his comfort. It wasn't my comfort that was at play. I saw myself as brown. I saw myself as, I wouldn't say inferior, yeah, but I guess you could say inferior to, sort of post-colonial world. No? But I did see myself as a person out of place, that is for certain. Somebody who did not necessarily, and nobody did anything. I never experienced a single moment of racism in my 2 years of architecture in an overt sense.
I would
It
say
was just a kind of construction of my identity that had internalized brownness, maybe.
No, I mean,
yeah, I think there is. I can clearly say that this way of speaking of race is yes, it's still there. There is this consciousness, but it is quite specific now. I think, especially as a single Indian male, since Nirbhaya, there are, at least in the sort of libidinal world that we live in, yes, you are way more conscious. You carry the responsibility of the reputations of your upbringing and people you represent a little bit more, I guess. You worry about those things. At work, though, when it comes to architecture, what I find especially fulfilling and satisfying is that there is, I wouldn't say, it's not a question of prestige. It's more a question of that there is, I found people from all over the world trusting the institutions that I claim to have been trained at.
yeah. No,
So there is always that welcoming. So architecturally, as an architect, yes, I don't have to worry about it.
and I also think there is this, I would personally attribute it in a way also to this kind of know your privilege situation. I mean, if I was to look at it from the moment I arrived here in 2017 to now, the kind of circles that I ended up getting exposed to, I did not sort of, feel this, not just overt, even and an undercurrent. Because I feel I was also lucky enough to be exposed or was hanging out with people who were these kind of people who were, especially where I was living when I first moved here. It was a building filled with these kind of, young professionals in the age group of 23 to 32, something like that. And each one of them facing those similar problems that every individual at around that age is feeling, that same boss ke saath lafda, and, I have to pay my bills, I have to clean the house, I have to do this. These kind of spaces that at least I was exposed to, I sort of felt suddenly like in fact, it was a reverse thing. That is, I came with a lot of prejudice that I am going to be sort of looked at through many different.
I do think, that the world has changed. I mean, when I went, it was what, 1994, no?
Yeah.
And that was what, 30 whatever years back. No? That's quite a long time back.
Yeah.
right? So it is different. I mean, Germany has changed, India has changed. At that point, I think we did not have that much exposure to the world outside either.
Yeah.
When you and also, in other words, the only exposure I probably had to what was Europe or America, for that matter, came through popular culture and nothing else. There
Yeah.
was nothing else.
Yeah.
And even that popular culture only came in 1992 when we had what satellite television.
Right.
Before that was controlled by the state. So in many ways, I think you guys are living in a different sort of mediated world entirely than one that I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And maybe that also changes quite a bit on both sides.
Yeah.
There has been much more migration from India abroad also in that entire period of time.
Also, I think our socialist, at least in my case, also in Chirag's case, a Bengali growing up in Mumbai, I think
And a
we're
Sindhi,
really well equipped to face, in a way, this kind of a world where, I'm in Frankfurt, but it's not really known for it, but it's quite a metropolitan mix of people here. Cosmopolitan mix of people here. We have people from all over the world that we meet almost on a daily basis, or at least people whose families are all from all over the world, who came to Germany in the last 20 years, grew up here, or went to architecture school here. And the sort of difference is always acknowledged and negotiated quite smoothly here now. And I personally experienced it for a good part of the last 6 years.
And Germany in particular, I find to be very, very open compared to the other countries I've been to, even in Europe. Actually, Germany is the country I think I've been to the most number of times besides the Netherlands for some damn reason or the other.
And not Italy. Italy?
Not Italy. I've been to once now. Germany, you get called for all these lectures. Yeah, I've been to Berlin twice, thrice to Berlin and Hamburg and what's that, Stuttgart, I think, and Kassel. There was a place near
Göttingen. I think that's where you gave that. You screened the film and gave a lecture, something like that. I remember. Yeah, that was recently. Yeah,
and Germany is, I think, one of the more. It's always had a history of being interested in the world outside. No? It's a deeply philosophical kind of culture.
Yeah, the Frankfurt School is 20 minutes from where we are sitting.
Onward, Max Muller has always been in the world, no?
Yeah.
So, the Germanics.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, great.
Okay.
Rohan, we can talk for hours and hours, but I think we have to stop.
Thank you so much for doing this.
It was enjoyable enough. Thanks for the conversation.
So there you go, guys. That was our conversation with Rohan Shivkumar. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. Stay tuned for more such conversations coming ahead. Please follow us on Instagram. That's where we post our updates regarding the new conversations that are going to be uploaded. Our podcast is available on YouTube in video form, on Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcasts in audio form. Like it, share it, and most importantly, let us know what you think.